So, hi everyone, and welcome to a new edition of We Are Sunderland with myself, Scott Wilson, and Dom Shaw. Brought to you, as ever, in association with our sponsors, which are the Fans Museum and Cospex Opticians. Hope you've had a good week. Thanks very much for joining us again. How are you, Dom? You well?
I'm all right, mate. I'm all right. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, all good. So we'll have a little look back, obviously, at the Millwall game at the weekend, what that means. We will talk penalties, I'm afraid, so get ready for that. We'll have a little chat about kind of injuries and the defence and where we're at, and we'll have an early look ahead to this weekend, the obviously the trip to West Brom and where we're at in terms of the league position. But we'll start with Millwall. You were there, Dom. You were at the Stadium of Light. Not an all-time classic, I think it's fair to say, but probably an important result, given that it came obviously off the back of the international break and probably more specifically off the back of that Coventry no-show before. It just felt like it at least drew a line under all that.
Yeah, and I think just ensured that there was no lingering anxiety, concern, nervousness, I guess, in the stands and on the pitch. It was interesting. We spoke to Chris Meffam afterwards, and he admitted, just in passing really, but he admitted the confidence had taken a bit of a hit. And not just the Coventry game, but he kind of referred to a couple of games before the break. And it did feel like that break came at the good time. It felt like someone needed a break, a breather, a chance to reset, didn't it? And that Coventry performance was alarming because I think it was a one-off. I think it's a one-off. Clearly, Sunderland have not played well at times this season, and they've not won games, and they've not got results that they wanted to. But you've never felt shortchanged like you did that day before this season, have you?
I think it was alarming because you're right, it was a one-off, but you wondered, is this a sign of what it's going to be like for the rest of the season if Sunderland don't have anything to play for? And let's be honest, there's still a good chance, to all intents and purposes, they won't really in terms of getting into the playoffs. So I think it was important that at least there was a reaction and a statement that kind of says, look, I know where we are in the league table, but we're not just going to let this ebb away. We're not just going to let the season, drift away and then that allow that to then potentially become difficult for the playoffs. Because ultimately that feels like what the next month is all about, isn't it? Making sure that when that playoff semi-final first leg rolls around, and we'll get to the league table in a minute. I know top two, still mathematically possible, all that. All things being equal, it's going to be the playoffs, and it's about making sure that Sunderland are ready for that, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the next 4, 5, 6 weeks, 7 games is not about whether Sunderland get in the playoffs, really. It's about what state they find themselves in when they get to the playoffs, because they are going to be in the playoffs, aren't they? They are not going to fall off and completely fall away and have a collapse that would probably be unprecedented in the Championship. That's not going to happen. But the word Labrise used again and again after his after the game on Saturday in various different interviews was energy. He admitted the performance maybe wasn't as good as what he'd hoped, but the energy was there, and that is what, that in his words is Sunderland's greatest strength. Which I think shows you that he was alarmed by the lack of energy, the lack of not desire in the Coventry game, but Sunderland were off it, weren't they? Coventry looked like a team that wanted it more. I think it was important to bounce back in that way, and especially because the next 2 away games, you're at Norwich and West Brom, and we'll get to it, I know, West Brom and Norwich, sorry. West Brom clearly need a win. They lost at the weekend. And there's the Mowbray factor. And then Norwich got a win at the weekend. Still long shots for the top 6, but still, before the game at the weekend, obviously, have something to play for. They will feel like if they keep winning, they're in with a slim chance. So I think it felt important before those 2 tricky away games as well to get a positive result on Saturday.
So a couple of things to speak about specifically from the game before we look at the kind of wider picture. Let's start with the defence. It had to be reshuffled. It obviously was. Trey Hume goes across to the left and gets that. That's not a lager, by the way, is it? It looks very much like you're just casually swilling an afternoon half a lager there.
Yeah, I didn't know whether it looked like lager, apple juice, something, my own sample, or no, it's a green tea. But I ran out. I'm not the pretentious sort to drink out of a glass. But I've run out. All my cups are in the dishwasher. So
yeah, that's more like it.
So I've had to use a
Fine.
makeshift.
Thank goodness for that. Right. Let's get back on track.
It's a makeshift. It's a makeshift glass, like Regis Labrise opted for a makeshift,
Perfect.
forced into a makeshift.
Perfect. But just like that green tea is doing the job of quenching your thirst, so
I could do with a lager.
The job at left back. He gets the goal. Alan Brown obviously in at right back. I mean, how did you think that looked? And I mean, I guess, we've said all season, what would Sunderland do if anything happened to Trey Hume? Because they don't have another right back. Well, Alan Brown's probably the answer now, isn't he? If that was to become an issue in the rest of the season.
Yeah, it was what I expected to go beforehand. I know there was the Joe Anderson option, but Anderson has not played a league minute.
Yeah, I think we both kind of said that, didn't we? That we thought it'd be Brown either on the left or the right.
Yeah, and when you look back at Anderson, I think he's played 40 minutes of Championship football since he signed for Sunderland. Labrise clearly doesn't fancy him. He has not featured at all this season. So I know he's a defender, but I still thought it was more likely that he'd go for Brown because he trusts Brown, doesn't he? And I know he's playing slightly out of position, but he's obviously got bags of experience. And I thought he was rock solid, sound really. Meffam said afterwards he thought he was Sunderland's best player and he couldn't tell that he was a midfielder playing at right back. And I think a nod to Trey Hume for A, stepping over to left back as impressively as he did, and B, playing like he did on the back of what we now know is a troublesome injury that's bothered him for a fair old while. Now, it's going to be managed still, isn't it? The expectation is that Hume will be able to continue playing. But still, he hadn't trained at all until the day before. And even on the Friday, just took part in a light part of the session. So he's clearly not 100% fit. But if we didn't know, if it wasn't let out the bag by Northern Ireland manager last week, there'd be no indications of it.
No. Cracking finish as well. It's one of them that it looks easy, doesn't it? But the more you see it, the easier it becomes to put it halfway up the stand. It's one of them where it's a good finish.
I mean, if you're talking player of the years, and I'm sure we'll have a vid on this, a pod on this in the weeks to come, but just kind of off the top of your head, Hume's right there in the mix again, isn't he? He's got to be.
By dint of his consistency, if nothing else. There have been players who have had fantastic games and brilliant streaks. Isidore, when he had that run of goals, Job at the start of the season, Dan Neil, I think, has had a really good year. There have been games when Patterson's come to Sunderland's rescue. But I think you're right. I think if you're talking about the most consistent player of the season, I think Hume wins it by a street.
The only one who I think potentially make it, I think Meffam has been class. And in the 94th minute of a game that really, although Sunderland only led by a single goal, you never really sensed what's coming here. You never really sensed the sucker punch. And yet, after O'Nien misses the penalty, which obviously we'll get to, Meffam lunges in and makes a brilliant 93rd, 94th minute block. I think Meffam has been class this season. Really, really good. I think he's, if you've got all your centre halves fit, and clearly it hasn't worked out that way. We saw it a few weeks ago. I think it's Meffam and at the heart.
Yeah, I do. I think he's the number one pick at the minute.
Yeah.
Right, we've skirted around it. What on earth are we going to do if Sunderland get involved in a penalty shootout in the playoffs? Because my God, they're making a mess of them at the minute.
Yeah, 4 misses in a row now. It feels like you're not exaggerating to say it's a problem. It's an issue that Labrise needs to get to the bottom of.
If nothing else, the next time a player stands up to take one, that is the backdrop to it, isn't it? And like I say, it could be an absolutely crucial one in a playoff game. And then you've got the question of, well, who is going to take it?
Well, we'll get to that. So let's first talk O'Nien. I was instinctively sat there. I was surprised when he picked the ball up. I wondered whether he was doing that thing where they protect.
Keep hold of
that was my first thing. And Isidore and Mundler both walked away. Mundler had won the penalty. He wasn't happy. And I didn't think, even until it became absolutely clear, the penalty was getting ready to be taken, that it was O'Nien taking it. Now, I know he's got a good record, I think, in shootouts for Sunderland, but still, my instinctive response was to be surprised. I think Isidore should have taken it.
Yeah.
I know he missed 2, but he's got a good penalty record, Isidore, before those 2 against Burnley. This sounds daft. I think his 2 penalties at Burnley were good penalties.
I was just going to say exactly that.
Brilliant saves by Trafford. And he's your centre forward. And I think that was your opportunity at 1-0 up in the 88th minute of a game that, like, clearly it matters, but it's not do or die. That was probably the most low pressure environment and situation for him to put Burnley behind him and get back to it. But what do you do with the next one now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what you said. I was pretty flabbergasted that 09. I mean, I would have thought that if you were going to turn to a defender, you'd probably go with Hugh, man. Wouldn't you? He scored the goal. He's got a shot on him. But I'm with you. I'm with you. Where Sunderland are at now, I think you go back to Isidore. Because, like you say, you know, it's not like his penalty misses at Burnley. He looked like a bag of nerves and they were horrendous penalties. They were 2 very good saves. That can kind of happen to anyone. It has obviously become more of an issue now. But as your main centre forward, I think you go back to Isidore. I do. I mean, it's pretty clear from the fact that of who have taken penalties so far, that for whatever reason, Job doesn't really fancy it. He would, I would have thought, be your kind of logical next step. But the fact that Roberts had his go, the fact that O'Nine's now had a go, it clearly isn't at the top of Job's priority list to be taking the next penalty. It feels like the same is probably true of Rick. So I think you go back to Isidore, don't you?
Yeah, Mundle wanted it. Mundle was disappointed not to be taking it. And Labrie said 2 things afterwards. Said that it doesn't really have a problem with that. That was just the emotion of Mundle's response. But he did confirm that O'Nien was the allocated taker before the game. Now, what I thought was interesting was, my reading of it at the time was O'Nien, as club captain, has just taken the bull by the horns here, because after the whole Isidore Burnley thing, Labrie had said then, hadn't he, who's going to take the next penalty? And he said, basically, he'll let the players decide on the pitch in the situation. So that was my reading of it. Well, clearly that wasn't the case. It was decided. Labrie also said on Saturday they're going to talk about it this week. So you're there speaking to Labrie on Thursday, aren't you? It is a talking point.
Well, it is. Yeah.
On Saturday, who's going to take it? It'll be fascinating to see if he has an answer, and if he says it's decided, and he might not say who it's going to be, but if he says it has now been,
we know kind
decided,
of thing.
Yeah. Because the other thing is, if a playoff game goes to a semi-final now, semi-final goes to penalties or a final, it's not an ideal backdrop, that is it?
Well, it's there in the background, isn't it? Whether you like it or not. Yeah, exactly. The flip side of it is Patterson at the other end has made some really, really good penalty saves for Sunderland. I'd fancy it.
Do you stick him on the next?
So maybe we're looking at 0-0 penalty on penalties.
Oh dear! But you feel like, I mean, you almost felt a bit like the first story I wrote after the game on Saturday was Labrie on penalties and the problem, and it's kind of one of them where you think they've won here and you get the whole story. But that was the story. If you go back to like what a fans talked about in the boozer straight after the game, then it's And who takes?
Absolutely.
It wasn't a good penalty either, was it?
No, it wasn't. It really wasn't. No, like you say, whereas Isidore, I think you could make excuses for both of his at Turf Moor. 09's was a weak. I mean, it felt to me like the Millwall keeper was halfway down before 09 hit the ball, and he still hit it straight at him. No, it wasn't a good penalty.
The other thing, finally, on the issue on Isidore is, and I think we've had this conversation earlier in the season, but we're back there now. He looks like a striker who could do with a goal again.
Yeah.
And he missed an early chance. Sunderland had 3 chances inside the first 60 seconds. And Isidore does miss chances, doesn't he? We've seen that over the course of the season. But he has the look of a striker, I think, who benefit. I don't point out the blatantly obvious, but you know exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
I think he's a striker who looks like he'd benefit from a goal or 2 again, just to get him going again. I think it's been 6 appearances now. Now, that's not 6 games, is it? Because he had the spell on the bench. But I think because of that spell on the bench, because of the lack of goals, feels like he's lost his rhythm somewhat. And it goes back to what we were saying last week. This might well have happened. I do think he'd benefit now from Labrie saying you're in for the next 3, 4, however many games, and kind of doesn't matter if you don't score on Saturday, the place is yours, just to get him back up to speed and in rhythm again, I think, before the playoffs.
Well, let's have a look at where we're at now. I'll just say if you've stuck with us to this point, then thank you. But if you watch it on YouTube, give us a like, give us a subscribe. It really helps with the old algorithms and getting it out there and all that kind of stuff. If you're listening on one of the various podcast platforms that we're available on, then please rate and review. And again, get in touch with either myself or Dom. Let us know about what you want to talk about in the rest of the season. We'll have plenty going on between now and the end of the season. 7 games to go then. Let's have a quick look. So we now have Sheffield United on the top of the league. We're recording this, by the way, on Tuesday afternoon. Sheffield United, top of the league, 83 points. Leeds, wobbling somewhat, 81. Burnley, 81. Sunderland, 72. So 9 points, 7 games to go. I mean, like I say, Leeds are beginning to have their Leeds are falling apart wobble, but the wheels would still have to come off pretty spectacularly for Sunderland to genuinely be able to get back in amongst it, wouldn't they?
Yeah, because you need 2 teams to fall, really, don't you? And Burnley look really solid. And even if it was a 9-point buffer, not only do you need them to falter, Sunderland probably need to be near perfect. It's not going to happen, is it? Sunderland are going to finish 4th in the Championship. They're not going to catch the teams above, and there's no chance of being caught by the teams below. Although I think Coventry's defeat and Sunderland's win just ensured that you're not, although you never really felt like they were at risk of being overtaken, it just makes sure you're not glancing over your shoulder, doesn't it?
I mean, that's 15 points now, isn't it, to 7th position. So, I mean, if we look at, I know it's very early and we'll be talking about this till the cows come home and we'll be having much deeper dives into this later on, but Coventry, West Brom, Borough, Bristol City. Would there be a preference there? Would there be a team you'd want to avoid there? I mean, Borough, you've obviously got the northeast element. West Brom, where Sunderland are obviously at this weekend, you've got the Tony Mowbray element. Coventry and Bristol City feel like the 2 sides at the moment that have been in the best form. Would there be a preference or a one you'd want to avoid?
My instinct probably says Bristol City, just on the back of Coventry thumping Sunderland last week. And I think the kind of narrative and everything that would surround the West Brom and the Borough game. And the added element for the Borough game is, I think, the scenes at full time when Sunderland won at the Riverside.
It might be a factor.
Yeah. I mean, Sunderland would still be favourites against both those teams, wouldn't they? Because they've been far better and far more consistent over the course of the season. But I think Bristol City would probably be the team you'd look at. The only thing there is I think Bristol City have only the top 4, obviously including Sunderland, have a better home record than Bristol City this season. So going to Ashton Gate in the first game would be difficult. But then we've seen again and again and again this season, haven't we, that Sunderland are capable of going and grinding out results. The fixtures are running across the bottom there. Sunderland have to travel to Bristol City Good Friday. That'll be interesting, won't it? Because for all any playoff games, they're not going to be carbon copies. And you would hope that if they play Coventry, obviously it was very different. It just gives you an indicator, doesn't it, as to what potentially to expect.
Yeah, and I think West Brom will this weekend as well, because obviously, as we keep on saying, it's a massive game for West Brom. This, that scrap for 5th and 6th position is massively intense now, and teams can't really afford to be slipping up too often there, because there's 4, looks like 4 for 2 places, might end up being more than 4, but West Brom will, I think it'll be interesting to see. Sunderland, the question mark after Coventry was, where are Sunderland's motivation levels at? Are they prepared to really get stuck in these last few games when fundamentally they know the result isn't crucial? Well, they kind of answered that to a degree last weekend, but I think it's maybe, a home game against, all right, Millwall on the fringe of the playoff teams, but not one of the division's really better sides, you'd say. Okay, that's fine. That's a box partially ticked. I think they'll have to be on their mettle on Saturday at the Hawthorns. So I think this will give us probably a better indication of, are Sunderland properly switched on now for the rest of this season? Where are they? Because I think they'll have to be somewhere near their best if they're going to go and win at West Brom.
I think that all the next 3 away games, West Brom, I completely agree. Then Norwich, now just looking at the championship table, you alluded to it there. Bristol City 8th, 57 points. Then there's a 4-point gap to Watford in 53. And Watford, Norwich, Blackburn, and Sheff Wed are separated by a point. It feels unlikely that any of those 4 teams are going to get in the top 6, but they are still in it. As things stand, that will be what they're aiming for. Now, Norwich beat West Brom at the weekend, and they play Plymouth away, but they play Plymouth at the weekend. Now, if they win there, then suddenly their hopes of forcing the way in have been revitalised in the case of a week. And that game next Tuesday, if Norwich fail to win on Saturday, then they're out of it, aren't they? And you think that'll take the edge off them before Tuesday's game. Then that Bristol City game. So the Swansea home game looks like the kind of home game you'd hope for at this stage of the season, doesn't it? I know they took points off Leeds at the weekend.
And I suspect Blackburn at home will be like that by then, because it feels very much like the wheels are coming off at Blackburn. So I think, you know, the home games that Sunderland have left might not tell us a great deal between now and the end of the season. I suspect the away matches will tell us a lot more.
Yeah, I agree. Starting this weekend, clearly. And if you can get a positive result there, I mean, I say then, Sunderland aren't going to catch the top 2. I don't for 1 minute think they are. If the gap becomes 5-6 points, and it suddenly becomes at least a talking point again, doesn't it? But I think everyone's agreed it's not going to happen.
That's it. I think the belief is that it won't. Like you say, you know, if there is a weekend where Sunderland win and 2 of the top 3 lose, then okay, that is a genuine swing. Like you say, the problem Sunderland have got at the minute is they need 2 teams to slip up. So, you know, if Leeds were to really have a wobble, or if Burnley were to suddenly start letting goals in all of a sudden, then yeah, okay. But the chances of 2 of the top 3 going on the kind of run that they've not remotely looked like going on at any stage so far this season feels pretty far-fetched.
A word from Mowbray then before we finish.
Yes.
I mean, great, first of all, clearly, obviously, to see him back in the dugout after all he'd gone through. And he's a rare breed, Mowbray, isn't he? In that he's a popular figure with all of his former clubs, and you just do not get that in management, do you, and in football?
No, that's it. And I think a lot of that is just because he's a fundamentally nice bloke, and that comes across in everything that he does, you know what I mean? So, you know, I think if you look back at his time at Sunderland, then for lots of different reasons, it has to go down as a success. You know, that first season into the playoffs, all right, ultimately couldn't get over the line against Luton, but we all know the injuries. We all know the team they had to put out with Kenilworth Road. I think there's definitely reasons for that. And then when you look at, you know, some of the young players who are doing so well now, you know, Riggs a very good example, Mowbray massively important in getting him bedded into the first team. Obviously, Bellingham came in the summer that Mowbray was here, and he kind of got him in and everything. Mayenda could easily have been written off early on, and Mowbray clearly didn't feel he was ready at the time, but also didn't write him off and kept him bubbling along in the background. Obviously, the loan moves then came, and then he gets in it this summer. So I think there's lots of players that Mowbray was very, very important in bedding in and bringing through. Trey Hume, I think, another one. You know, that Mowbray really put a lot of faith in and a lot of trust in. So I think in that sense, it was really important. And then also, you know, I think he just helped build on the kind of positivity that came with the promotion under Alex Neil, and ensured that didn't go to waste. I think, you know, it nearly did when he left, because we all know the Michael Beale saga and all of that. We don't have to dredge all that up again. But certainly during Mowbray's time at the club, I think that the positive momentum that had started to be generated under Neil was definitely built on it. And I think that's a big factor in getting Sunderland to where they are now.
Sorry, yeah, 100%. In terms of dealing with managers, is he right up there with the best?
Yeah, he's got to be, because, and again, you know, I keep coming back to it. He's just a nice bloke, and a nice bloke who is massively enthusiastic about talking about football. Loves it. Can't get enough of just chatting about football and footballers and bringing players through. You know, clearly, massively buys into the whole youth development thing. You know, yes, we all know that by the end there were it clashes in terms of recruitment and what he felt the club needed and all of that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, he's a manager who massively buys into the idea of developing young players, giving them time, supporting them. And I keep coming back to the fact that, you know, a lot of Sunderland's young talent probably wouldn't be where they are now had he not been the manager who succeeded Alex Neil. And then, yeah, from a press point of view, a real pleasure to deal with. Lovely fella, would answer you anything, more than happy to chat about this, that, and the other. And I guess told it a bit like it is. You know, clearly the press conference that stands out with Mowbray is the one under the tunnel after they'd lost to Luton, when it became pretty clear that actually there were issues at the club, and he was starting to bang his head against the wall a bit in terms of his relationship with Speakman and recruitment and things like that. You know, it would have been easy for him to kind of sugarcoat that and hide it, but he was pretty explicit that night, and it became pretty clear that it was going to be an interesting summer. And, you know, maybe in hindsight, that would have been the time for the club to move on. As it was, obviously, he started the next season and things came to a head, and he, you know, he left by the autumn, didn't he? But no, lovely fella to deal with. I think, you know, all Sunderland fans will just be really pleased that he's come through what's clearly been an incredibly difficult time in terms of his health and the cancer treatment and all of that. And he'll get a right reception from the away end before the game at the weekend. It'll be good to see.
And hugely popular still with the players as well. Trey Hume was in after one of the recent home games. I can't remember which one it was off the top of my head, but he was in speaking to the media, and he was saying then just how hugely popular he was, how liked he was, how pleased he is to see him back in the game and doing well. What do you reckon then, Saturday? And who scores Sunderland's penalty?
Draw.
Yeah, I think draw. Score draw.
1-1. Yeah, I think 1-1. I think it'll be. I think Sunderland might take the lead. Isidore 23, and then West Brom equalise kind of about on the hour mark, and we finish 1-1.
And it was a win at West Brom in the Mowbray season. They won 2-1 there. Did Sirkin score twice? Sirkin definitely scored. But that was when Sunderland were on there, a bit of a charge at the back end of the season, where you suddenly thought, like, hold on, they really might be in with a shout here of getting in the top six. Obviously, Mowbray was in charge then. I think a draw's a good result.
Madger's not fit, is he?
No, he's been out.
I should have done my research here, but I don't think there's an expectation that he'll be back before the end of the season. And that obviously is a blow for West Brom, because first half of the season he'd been their kind of star man, really.
Well, they signed Adam Armstrong.
Obviously, you've got Adam Armstrong. Yeah. And obviously Carlin Grant's there as well. But yeah, no Madger. Yeah, 1-1. I'll go 1-1.
Yeah, I agree. I'll go 1-1, and I think that's a decent result.
I would agree. I would completely agree. I think if Sunderland are going to draw on Saturday, then at the very least they'll have to have the right attitude. And at the moment, like I say, that's almost more important for me than what they're doing. We know they can play. It's, are their heads switched on between now and the end of the season to ensure that they're not going to go on the kind of bad run that might just scupper the playoff bid before it even starts.
Well, we'll wrap up there. As Scott said, do give us a shout if there's anything you want us to discuss, sort of get stuck into over the course of the remaining weeks of the season. Thanks, as we said at the start, to our partners, the Fans Museum and the Cospex Opticians. Thanks to you for watching, listening. Do get in touch. Do subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Rate and review if you're listening on your podcast platforms. Enjoy the game this weekend. Safe travels if you're heading to the Hawthorns. And we'll be back next week for our next episode of We Are Sunderland. Take care.